What would you do if a HOA built an entire neighborhood on your land, then told you to get out? That's the nightmare one man faced, until his grandfather's century-old deed came back to life and turned the tables on everyone. Leonard McKinney never thought his life could change with the rip of an envelope. But on a warm Thursday morning in May, sitting at his kitchen table in Round Rock, Texas, he tore open a letter that made his stomach turn. It wasn't a tax bill. It wasn't a bank statement. It was something far worse. The letter bore the seal of the Clearwater Meadows Homeowners Association, an upscale subdivision that had sprung up right on the edges of land Leonard's family had walked for generations. Inside, in sharp, matter-of-fact legal language, it told him he had 60 days to vacate the property. According to the HOA, the land under his feet no longer belonged to him. It was now designated community land of their subdivision of 156 newly built homes. Leonard set the letter down, his hands shaking. He wasn't a man easily rattled. At 62, he'd spent a lifetime working with his hands, raising his family, and holding on to the one thing his grandfather had sworn never to let go: the land. This wasn't just dirt and grass. This was legacy. "Vacate," he muttered aloud, as if the word itself might sound different once spoken. He grabbed the phone and dialed his younger sister, Denise McKinney Rowe, who lived just 2 streets over. The call connected. "Leonard, what's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost." "They're trying to put me off our land," Leonard said, his voice low and tight. "The HOA says I'm squatting on their community space. They want me gone in 60 days. There was silence on the other end. Then Denise's voice rose sharp. "That can't be right. Daddy paid those taxes year after year, and Grandpa made sure no one could take it." Leonard closed his eyes. He could see his grandfather Ezekiel's face, weathered but proud, sitting on that porch 40 years earlier. Ezekiel had told him, almost like a warning, "Boy, this land has claws. It'll hold on if you hold on. Don't ever let them trick you out of it." "I've got the letter right here," Leonard said, snapping back to the present. "They're not asking, Denise. They're telling." "Then we're telling them no." Denise shot back. "You hear me? We don't walk off this land, not after everything Grandpa went through." Leonard rubbed the edge of the paper, the black print blurring as his eyes watered. He hadn't cried in years, not since his wife's funeral, but the idea of losing the land, of strangers wiping away his family's blood and sweat with a signature, felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for. By evening, word had spread through his small corner of the community. Neighbors stopped by, some with sympathy, others with guarded expressions. The new subdivision folks, people who had bought their forever homes in Clearwater Meadows, looked at Leonard differently now. He wasn't just the quiet man on the edge of the neighborhood. He was suddenly the enemy, the obstacle standing in the way of their parks and clubhouses. One man, a homeowner named Gregory Hansen, walked up his driveway that night, his polo shirt crisp, his voice impatient. "Mr. McKinney, I just want to say, we're all sorry about the confusion, but the HOA has the paperwork. The development was approved years ago. This is, well, it's settled business." Leonard squared his shoulders. "Settled business? My family has been here for more than a century. Your HOA didn't even exist 10 years ago. Tell me what's settled about that." Gregory shifted uncomfortably, then shrugged. "Look, I don't want trouble, but the board will press charges if you refuse to leave. That's the reality. The word tasted bitter. Leonard knew this wasn't just about property. This was about erasure. It was about history repeating itself, land stripped away, family ties ignored, legacy stolen under the disguise of legal jargon. After Gregory left, Leonard sat back on his porch, the letter in his lap. Denise came over with coffee, her face set with determination. "We're not rolling over, Leonard. Grandpa didn't plant us here just to be uprooted. Remember that." He nodded slowly. The fight wasn't just beginning. It had begun 100 years earlier, when Ezekiel McKinney put pen to paper and crafted a safeguard no one fully understood. Until now. But Leonard knew he couldn't fight this battle with memories alone. He needed proof, and he needed someone who could wield it like a weapon. Leonard couldn't sleep that night. The letter sat on his kitchen counter like a snake coiled to strike. He got up at 3 in the morning, poured himself a cup of black coffee, and stared out the window toward the fields his grandfather had once plowed by hand. The silence wasn't comforting. It felt heavy, like the weight of history pressing down. By sunrise, Denise was back. She didn't knock, just walked straight in, carrying a shoebox. She set it on the table with a thud. "I dug this out from the back of Mama's closet," she said. "Been there since she passed. I think you're going to want to see what's inside." Leonard frowned and pulled off the lid. Inside lay a stack of old papers, yellowed with time, bound with a rubber band that snapped the second he touched it. His fingers trembled as he pulled out the first document. It was the deed. Handwritten in looping ink, signed in 1924 by Ezekiel McKinney, Leonard's grandfather. The words were plain, but powerful. The land was to remain under McKinney ownership indefinitely. And if it was ever taken, sold, or developed without written consent from his descendants, it would revert, legally and automatically, back to the family. Leonard exhaled sharply, the weight of what he was holding settling in. Good Lord, he really did it. Denise leaned in, her eyes wet but fierce. He knew this was coming. Not the HOA, not the subdivision, but he knew someone would try to take it. He saw too much in his lifetime to trust the system. They sat in silence, each absorbed in the gravity of the discovery. The shoebox held more than the deed. There were old tax receipts, Ezekiel's letters to county clerks, even faded photographs of him standing on the very land Clearwater Meadows now claimed as their own. Leonard lifted one of the photos. Ezekiel, in overalls, standing beside a mule and plow. His expression was hard, unyielding. Behind him stretched acres of open land, wide as the horizon. He was fighting even then, Leonard whispered. They tried to run him off, didn't they? Denise nodded. You remember the stories. The county doubled his taxes in 1935, tried to claim he hadn't paid. He walked 12 miles to the courthouse with receipts in his pocket. Said to the clerk, I pay what's mine. You'll not steal me blind. He dared them to deny it, and they backed down. Leonard laughed, though it was hollow. That's Grandpa for you. Stubborn as a mule and twice as strong. Denise leaned back. He wasn't just stubborn, Leonard. He was smart. That deed? That was his insurance policy. He knew if the law could take land, then the law could also protect it. He wrote it to outlast him, and maybe even us. For the first time since the letter arrived, Leonard felt a flicker of hope. He pressed the deed flat against the table, his jaw tight. Then we've got to fight them. If Ezekiel left us this, it's because he trusted we'd use it. Just then, the sound of tires crunching gravel pulled Leonard's attention. Another Clearwater Meadows homeowner had come by. This time it was a woman named Patricia Lowell, who lived in one of the corner houses with her husband. She carried herself carefully, like she'd practiced what to say. Mr. McKinney, she began softly, I don't want any trouble, but people are scared. They're saying if this goes to court, the whole subdivision could be at risk. Some of us just bought our houses last year. We put everything into this place. Leonard met her gaze. I don't blame you, Mrs. Lowell. You were sold a dream. But that dream sits on my grandfather's land. They didn't tell you the truth. Patricia hesitated, her lips parting. Are you saying you actually own this property? All of it? Leonard slid the old deed across the table. Not just me, my family. For 100 years. And your HOA never even checked before they poured the concrete. She looked down at the faded ink, her face draining of color. If this is real, they've lied to all of us. Denise's voice was steady. That's exactly what happened. Patricia swallowed hard, then turned toward the door. People need to hear this. But I warn you, some won't care. They'll call you greedy, say you're trying to tear families apart. Leonard shook his head slowly. Families were torn apart long before me. I'm just holding the line. When Patricia left, Denise clasped her brother's shoulder. We've got the truth, Leonard, but truth alone doesn't win. We need someone who knows how to fight with it. Leonard stared at the shoebox, then back at the deed. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind, stubborn and proud. The land has claws. It'll hold on if you hold on. But Leonard also knew the next step was bigger than family arguments on porches. It was time to put this paper in the hands of someone who could make the system listen. The next week, Leonard showed up at the Clearwater Meadows HOA meeting. He didn't dress up for the occasion. No suit, no tie, just his work boots, faded jeans, and a denim shirt that had seen better days. To him, this wasn't about appearances. This was about survival. The meeting was held inside the subdivision's brand-new clubhouse, a gleaming brick building with wide windows and polished hardwood floors. Leonard felt out of place the moment he stepped inside. Rows of folding chairs were packed with homeowners, couples in their 30s, young families with toddlers, retirees who had sunk their life savings into this neighborhood. As Leonard entered, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some folks glanced at him with pity. Others glared like he was a trespasser. But he kept walking, holding the folded deed in his hand like a shield. At the front of the room sat the HOA board, 5 people behind a long table. The president, Bradley Kincaid, was a tall man with sharp features and a polished look, the kind of person who seemed more comfortable in a boardroom than a neighborhood clubhouse. He adjusted his tie, gave Leonard a cold smile, and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradley began, "thank you for attending tonight's special session. As you know, there has been some confusion regarding a small portion of land adjacent to our community space. We intend to clear this up tonight." Leonard raised his hand before Bradley could continue. "Confusion?" he said loudly. "That's one way to put it. You built 156 homes on my family's land, and now you're telling me to get off it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Bradley's smile faltered for half a second, then returned, smoother this time. "Mr. McKinney, with all due respect, our records show that property was legally acquired by Clearwater Development over a decade ago. We have the permits, the zoning, everything required by the county." Leonard unfolded the paper in his hand and held it up. "You don't have this. My grandfather wrote it in 1924. This land can't be taken without our family's consent. And we never gave it." A murmur spread among the homeowners. Some leaned forward to get a better look. Others exchanged nervous glances. One man in the crowd, Harold Stevenson, stood up and pointed. "Are you saying our homes are sitting on stolen land?" Bradley held up a hand. "Let's not exaggerate. We purchased this development fair and square. The county recognized the transaction. Titles were issued. Families moved in. Mr. McKinney's claim is historical at best. It doesn't apply to current ownership." Leonard's jaw tightened. "You think history doesn't matter? My grandfather put that deed in place because he knew people like you would come along. You didn't bother to check before you built. That's not my fault. That's yours." Another homeowner, a young mother named Samantha Ruiz, stood up from the back with her baby balanced on her hip. "If he's telling the truth, then what happens to us? Do we lose our homes?" Her voice cracked. The room buzzed with tension. Bradley cleared his throat. "Nobody is losing anything. We'll have our attorneys review Mr. McKinney's so-called document. Until then, everything stands as is." Leonard took a step forward, his boots echoing on the hardwood floor. "Don't you call it so-called? This is the law. You can try to talk over me, but the law is older than your HOA and stronger than your paperwork. If you want me gone, you're going to have to go through the courts." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Bradley shifted in his chair, then leaned into the microphone. "Very well. If that's how you want to handle it, we'll see you in court. But know this, you're not just fighting us. You're fighting 156 families who poured everything they have into this neighborhood." Leonard met his stare. "Then they should be angry at you, not me. You're the ones who lied to them." The room erupted, some shouting in support of Leonard, others yelling at him to stop. A few people stormed out, while others huddled in groups, whispering frantically. Denise, who had come with Leonard, tugged at his arm. "You made your point, brother. Let's go. You don't need to argue with all of them tonight." Reluctantly, Leonard folded the deed back into his pocket and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, Bradley's voice rang out, smooth and cutting. "You're making a mistake, Mr. McKinney. You think you're standing on principle, but all you're doing is causing chaos. People will see you as the villain, not the victim." Leonard didn't turn around. He just pushed the door open and walked into the night. His voice, low but firm, carried back through the doorway. Let them see what they want. The truth doesn't change. Back in the truck, Denise was fuming. He called you the villain. Can you believe that? After everything this family's been through? Leonard started the engine, his hand steady on the wheel. I don't care what he calls me. Villain, squatter, troublemaker. It doesn't matter. What matters is the deed. Grandpa gave us the weapon, and I intend to use it. Denise leaned against the window, her voice softer now. Then we need someone who knows how to fire it. We need a lawyer who won't be scared off. Leonard's eyes fixed on the road ahead. He didn't know who that lawyer would be, but he knew one thing. This fight was bigger than an HOA meeting. It was about history, justice, and the right to exist on the land his grandfather had fought so hard to keep. But finding the right person to stand beside him in that courtroom would be the difference between victory and ruin. The morning after the HOA meeting, Leonard sat at his kitchen table with the deed spread out in front of him, a legal pad by his elbow, and a list of phone numbers he'd scribbled down from the county clerk's office. He wasn't a man who trusted lawyers. Too many bad memories of slick talkers who promised the world and delivered nothing. But Denise was right. This wasn't a fight he could handle alone. He picked up the phone and dialed the first number on his list, a local attorney in Georgetown. The receptionist put him on hold, then came back with polite regret. I'm sorry, Mr. McKinney. Land disputes against HOAs are extremely complicated, and we're not taking new cases of that type right now. The second call was no better. The third ended with a brusque, You don't have a case, sir. Those old deeds don't hold up anymore. By the fifth call, Leonard was gripping the receiver hard enough to whiten his knuckles. He hung up and muttered to himself, They don't even want to listen. That afternoon, Denise dropped by again, bringing lunch and her stubborn persistence. Any luck? She asked, setting a sandwich in front of him. Nothing. Either they're scared of the HOA, or they think I'm chasing ghosts, Leonard said bitterly. Denise chewed slowly, then wiped her hands. You remember Carla Jennings? She's a lawyer now. Out in Austin. She was 2 years behind me in school. Leonard frowned. Carla Jennings? The one who used to run track? That's her. She's tough. I heard she took on a developer last year who tried to bulldoze over a family ranch. She won. Leonard sighed, glancing at the deed. I don't need someone who's tough. I need someone who can see what Grandpa saw when he wrote this thing. Someone who understands that this isn't just ink on paper. It's blood. Denise placed her hand over his. Then maybe she's the one. Reluctantly, Leonard agreed to meet her. The next morning, he and Denise drove to Austin. Carla's office sat in a modest brick building near the courthouse. Not flashy, not polished, but professional. Inside, the walls were lined with books, case files, and framed newspaper clippings of past victories. Carla herself was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed with a quick smile that didn't quite hide how serious she was. She greeted them warmly, then gestured toward a table. Mr. McKinney, Denise, it's good to see you both. Now, tell me what's going on. Leonard wasted no time. He slid the deed across the table. They built an entire subdivision on our land. And now they're trying to throw me off it. Carla adjusted her glasses, reading the old ink carefully. Her eyebrows arched higher the further down she went. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping the paper lightly. Well, she said slowly, this is remarkable. I've seen a lot of old deeds, but this one is different. Your grandfather wrote a reversion clause. That's rare, and it's strong. Leonard leaned forward. So it means something, Carla nodded. It does. If this holds up in court, it could mean the land still belongs to you, every square foot of it. The problem is, the HOA and the developers will throw everything at us to prove otherwise. They'll argue the clause is outdated, that it doesn't apply, that the county overlooked it when they approved the subdivision. Denise crossed her arms. So what do we do? Carla smiled faintly. We fight. We file a quiet title action. We show the court this deed and argue that every transaction after 1924 was invalid without your family's consent. It won't be easy, but you have something most people in your position don't. Ironclad words on paper. Leonard exhaled, relief mixing with dread. They'll hate me for this. Those families. They'll see me as the man trying to take their homes." Carla's tone softened. "They're scared, Leonard. Fear makes people lash out. But you're not taking their homes. You're demanding respect for your history. The developers are the ones who put those families in this position, not you." Leonard stared down at the deed, Ezekiel's signature bold and unflinching. He thought of his grandfather, walking miles to the courthouse with nothing but receipts and a stubborn will. He thought of his father, working 2 jobs to keep the land taxes paid. And now, here he was, holding the line once again. Carla leaned forward, her voice firm. "If you want me to take this case, I will. But you need to understand, it'll be long, it'll be public, and it'll get ugly. Once we file, the media will swarm, the HOA will demonize you, and the stress will be heavy. Are you ready for that?" Leonard glanced at Denise. She gave him a small nod, her expression resolute. He turned back to Carla and said simply, "Yes, I'm ready." Carla extended her hand. "Then let's get started." As Leonard shook her hand, a strange mix of fear and determination surged through him. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about standing shoulder to shoulder with his grandfather, carrying forward the fight Ezekiel had prepared for a century earlier. But Leonard had no idea how quickly the battle would spill beyond the courtroom, dragging in neighbors, headlines, and a community forced to choose sides. Within days of Carla filing the lawsuit, word spread through Clearwater Meadows like wildfire. The homeowners' Facebook group lit up with angry posts, frantic questions, and long threads of arguments that stretched late into the night. Screenshots made their way to Leonard's phone, even though he hadn't joined the group himself. One post stood out. "Who does this man think he is? We bought our homes fair and square. He's trying to destroy 156 families." Another comment below it read, "If what he's saying is true, then we were all lied to. Maybe he's not the enemy." It didn't take long before lines were drawn in the sand. Some families saw Leonard as a threat, the man who could pull the rug out from under their mortgages. Others began to see him as the whistleblower, someone exposing the developers' lies. Leonard noticed the shift almost immediately. At the grocery store in Round Rock, a stranger tapped him on the shoulder. It was a father named Michael Grant, one of the newer residents of Clearwater Meadows. His tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. "Mr. McKinney," Michael said carefully, "I just want to know, what does this mean for my kids? We just bought our place, put every dime we had into it. Are we supposed to lose everything because of some old piece of paper?" Leonard took a deep breath. He could see the exhaustion in the man's eyes, the quiet fear of a parent who had taken a risk for his family's future. "I'm not here to take away your kids' home, Mr. Grant. I'm here to make sure my grandfather's promise isn't broken. The developers lied to you, and they lied to me. That's who you should be mad at." Michael's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, but instead he sighed. I can't tell my wife we might lose the house. She won't survive that." Leonard nodded slowly. "Then maybe we're on the same side, even if it doesn't look like it yet." Not everyone saw it that way. Later that week, Denise came by Leonard's house fuming. "I was at the gas station this morning," she said, pacing the living room. "That man, Gregory Hansen, the one who came by before, he was running his mouth about you. Said you're trying to shake down the HOA for money, that this whole thing's a scam." Leonard's brow furrowed. "A scam? After all the taxes we've paid, after all the nights Grandpa sat at the table figuring how to keep this land afloat? That man doesn't know a thing about sacrifice." Denise crossed her arms. "They're scared, Leonard, and when people are scared, they look for someone to blame. Right now, that's you." But not every interaction was hostile. 2 days later, a knock came at Leonard's door. Standing there was Patricia Lowell, the woman who had visited before. This time, she wasn't alone. She had her husband, Alan, with her. Both looked uneasy but determined. "Mr. McKinney," Patricia began softly, "we've been talking. We don't know how this is going to play out, but we believe you. We believe this land was stolen from your family, and we think people need to hear your side before they rush to judgment." Alan nodded. "Most of the neighbors are in the dark. They only hear what the HOA tells them. If you'd let us, maybe we could host a meeting. Just you, a few families. No shouting, no board members. just the truth. Leonard studied their faces. He could tell they weren't doing this to stir trouble. They were trying to bridge a gap, to keep panic from swallowing the neighborhood whole. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll talk, but I won't beg anyone to believe me. They'll have to see it for themselves. The meeting happened the following Saturday evening in Patricia's backyard. About a dozen homeowners showed up. Young parents, retirees, even a couple of teenagers who hung by the fence listening. Leonard brought the deed in a protective sleeve and laid it on the table under the porch light. He didn't give a speech. He told a story. He talked about Ezekiel walking miles to the courthouse, about the years of working double shifts to pay the taxes, about the promises made around kitchen tables that this land would never be lost. His voice cracked once, but he didn't stop. When he finished, silence hung in the air. Finally, Patricia spoke. If this is true, then they sold us homes on a lie. They've put all of us in a nightmare we didn't ask for. A young man named Jordan Bell, who had just bought a starter home with his wife, looked at Leonard with wide eyes. So what happens if you win? Do we all get kicked out? Leonard shook his head. That's not what I want. I want recognition that this land is ours. What comes next? We'll figure it out. But I'm not out to punish you. I'm out to honor my grandfather. Some nodded, others still looked unconvinced. But at least the hostility had softened, replaced by a quiet reckoning that the problem wasn't Leonard. It was deeper, older, and more complicated. When Leonard left Patricia's that night, Denise leaned close and whispered, "You did good, brother. They may not all believe you yet, but seeds were planted tonight." Leonard tightened his grip on the steering wheel as they drove home. He knew seeds were fragile things. They needed care, time, and patience. But he also knew storms were coming that could rip them out of the ground before they had a chance to grow. But Leonard was about to learn that the courtroom wouldn't just test the deed. It would test every bond in this community, stretching families, friendships, and loyalties to the breaking point. The courthouse in Austin wasn't foreign to Leonard, but he had never been there for something like this. Traffic hummed on Congress Avenue as he and Denise walked up the granite steps, clutching a folder that held more than paper. It held a century of their family's struggle. Carla met them outside, dressed in a navy blazer, calm but alert, like someone heading into a storm she'd already prepared for. "Today's just the filing," Carla reassured, handing Leonard a pen. "But once it's in, it's real. The HOA will get notice, the developers will get dragged in, and the headlines will follow. There's no turning back after this." Leonard didn't hesitate. "We've already been fighting this battle for 100 years. Might as well put it in writing." Inside, the filing clerk stamped the documents with a heavy thunk. Leonard stared at the ink mark like it was a seal burned into history. His grandfather's words, scrawled in fading ink nearly a century earlier, were now marching back into the present. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind. By that evening, a local news station was camped outside Leonard's property. A reporter shoved a microphone toward him as he tried to get into his truck. "Mr. McKinney, is it true you're claiming ownership over all of Clearwater Meadows?" Leonard adjusted his cap, his jaw tight. "I'm not claiming. I'm proving. My family never gave this land away." The next morning, the story hit the papers. Man claims HOA built 156 homes on his land. Online, the comments poured in. Some cheered him on, calling it justice overdue. Others accused him of greed, of trying to throw families out of their houses. At the grocery store, people pointed. Some shook his hand, others whispered behind their carts. Denise kept telling him to ignore it, but Leonard felt the stares like splinters. Carla called that afternoon. The HOA's attorneys responded fast. They're going to challenge the validity of the deed, argue it's obsolete. They'll say property rights can't survive untouched for 100 years. Leonard snorted. "They don't know my grandfather." Carla chuckled softly but turned serious again. "This will get messy. They'll try to drag your family name through the mud, make you look like a squatter trying to scam decent folks. We need to be ready for that." Denise, who was sitting nearby, leaned closer to the phone. "Let them try. We've got the receipts, the letters, the history. They can't erase that." But as the weeks passed, Leonard realized Carla had been right. The attacks came fast. HOA newsletters painted him as a selfish man willing to destroy families for money. Flyers showed up in mailboxes around the subdivision. "Protect our homes. Stop McKinney's land grab." One evening, while Leonard sat on his porch, Michael Grant, the father he had spoken to at the store, showed up again. His face was pale, his voice trembling. "Mr. McKinney, I'm begging you, please stop this. My bank called today. They said if the title's under dispute, our mortgage could be frozen. Do you know what that means for us? We'll be ruined before this even goes to trial." Leonard's heart ached at the man's desperation. He gestured for him to sit. "Michael, I hear you. I don't want your kids homeless. But this fight isn't about destroying you. It's about the truth. I can't let them steal my grandfather's land just because they tricked you too." Michael pressed his hands together, tears threatening. "I can't lose my house. I just can't." Leonard swallowed hard. "Then help me. Don't fight against me. Fight with me. Go after the ones who lied to you." Michael stared at him, speechless, then stood and walked away without answering. The following week, Carla organized a press conference on the courthouse steps. Denise urged Leonard to speak, even though the thought of standing in front of cameras made him uneasy. But he did. Facing the flashing lights, Leonard's voice was steady. "This isn't about tearing families apart. This is about my grandfather's fight to make sure his children and grandchildren would never be robbed again. If the developers lied to these homeowners, then they deserve answers too. I won't apologize for defending what's ours." The clip aired on the evening news, then spread online. Comments were even more divided now, but something shifted. More people began asking questions not about Leonard, but about the developers. How could they have missed a deed this strong? Why hadn't the county flagged it? Carla noticed the shift too. "Public pressure matters," she told Leonard after the press conference. "It won't win us the case, but it can stop the HOA from steamrolling you. The more people see you as a man protecting family, the harder it'll be for them to paint you as a villain." Denise added quietly, "Grandpa would be proud. You're making sure his voice is still heard." Leonard looked out over the courthouse lawn, where the cameras were still packing up. He thought of Ezekiel, walking into a courthouse with only a pocketful of receipts and a stubborn will. Now, nearly a century later, his grandson was walking those same steps with the weight of 156 families pressing down. But Leonard also knew that paperwork and headlines meant nothing once the trial began, because the real fight would be waged in the courtroom, where history and law would collide head-on. 2 weeks before the trial, Leonard sat with Carla and Denise in her office as they pored over the mountain of paperwork they'd collected. Deeds, tax receipts, Ezekiel's letters, even old photographs that showed the McKinney family working the very soil Clearwater Meadows now claimed. But Carla knew they needed more than paper. They needed a story. "Jurors don't just listen to documents," she explained, flipping through the folder. "They listen to people. They want to understand why this matters. If they see your grandfather as just a name on a page, they'll side with the HOA. If they see him as flesh and blood, as a man who fought to protect his family, they'll understand." Leonard leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. Grandpa Ezekiel wasn't just stubborn. He lived through things people can't imagine today. Denise nodded. "Tell her about the winter of 31. You remember." Leonard's jaw tightened. He did remember. He remembered his father's voice, telling it like scripture. Ezekiel had nearly lost the farm that year. A group of speculators, men with shiny cars and sharper smiles, had come knocking. They told him the county was about to raise taxes again, and that he'd never keep up. They offered him a small payout to walk away. Most men would have taken it, but Ezekiel didn't. Instead, he gathered every receipt, every scrap of proof of payment, and carried it to the courthouse himself. When the clerk tried to brush him aside, Ezekiel stood firm. "You don't get to steal what I've already paid for," he'd said, his voice ringing through the chamber. That day they backed down. Leonard swallowed hard. That fight shaped him, and it shaped us. He didn't just hold the land. He made the land hold us. Carla scribbled notes quickly. "That's what the jury needs to hear. Not just law, but legacy." That night, Leonard walked the property lines under the stars, his boots crunching on the dirt. He thought of Ezekiel's calloused hands pressing seeds into the soil, of his father's sweat dripping as he repaired fences, of his mother cooking beans in a kitchen that smelled of iron and wood smoke. Every inch of this place held memories. The following day, Denise surprised him with something even more powerful. She had spent hours digging in the county archives and came back with brittle newspaper clippings from the 1920s and 30s. One article described a heated dispute between Ezekiel and a county commissioner accused of pressuring black families off their land. Another showed a faded photograph of Ezekiel standing defiantly in front of the courthouse steps, a crowd watching behind him. "Look at this," Denise said, spreading the clippings on Leonard's table. Grandpa wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting everyone who looked to him as proof that the system couldn't swallow us whole. Leonard ran his fingers over the faded print. And now it's my turn. But history wasn't just helping Leonard, it was haunting the community too. More homeowners began researching, digging into their property records. Some discovered irregularities, missing documents, rushed approvals, even strange inconsistencies in the way the land was divided. A quiet panic spread. One evening, Patricia and Alan returned to Leonard's porch. Patricia's face was pale. "We found something," she whispered, handing over a folder. Inside were closing documents from their home purchase. The signatures from Clearwater Development's side didn't match the names listed on the permits. Leonard blinked. "They forged signatures?" Alan's voice was tight. "We don't know for sure, but it looks like fraud." Carla, when she saw the documents later, nearly whistled. "If this is true, it doesn't just strengthen your case. It blows theirs apart. Fraud is a whole new battlefield. The jury won't like the idea of a corporation lying to homeowners." But with every piece of history that surfaced, the pressure grew. At church that Sunday, Leonard felt the weight of eyes on him. Some filled with support, others with suspicion. After service, an elderly man approached him. "Son," the man said softly, "I knew your grandfather. He was hard but fair. If he said this land was meant for you, then don't let anyone scare you off. Folks like him don't come around often." Leonard thanked him, but the words stirred a deeper ache. The past wasn't just paper and memory. It was still alive, still breathing through the voices of those who remembered Ezekiel firsthand. That night, Denise sat with Leonard on the porch, the air heavy with the scent of rain. "You realize," she said quietly, "this isn't just about us anymore. It's about everyone who ever got pushed off their land, who never had a piece of paper to fight back with." Leonard's gaze drifted across the darkened subdivision, the rows of houses lined neatly on soil that had once been open fields. "I know," he said. "That's why I can't quit. Grandpa left us the deed, but he also left us the fight." But as powerful as history was, Leonard knew the courtroom wouldn't be swayed by sentiment alone. The next chapter would be a test of grit, law, and the weight of 100-year-old promise. The first day of the trial arrived on a grey Monday morning. Leonard woke before dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady tick of the clock. He dressed in his best suit, dark, pressed though a little worn, and pinned his grandfather's old pocket watch to his vest. Denise met him in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she poured coffee. "You ready?" she asked. Leonard gave a half smile. "Doesn't matter if I am. It's here." At the courthouse, the air buzzed with tension. The courtroom was packed, reporters with notepads, residents of Clearwater Meadows, curious townsfolk, even activists who had caught wind of the case and wanted to witness it. At the plaintiff's table, Leonard sat beside Carla, who had stacks of files neatly arranged. Across the aisle, the HOA's legal team occupied nearly the entire defense table. 3 lawyers in sharp suits, their laptops open, their expressions cool and confident. At the center sat Bradley Kincaid, the HOA president, his arms folded, eyes locked on Leonard like this was a personal war. The judge, Samuel Worthington, entered promptly at 9. His voice was steady as he called the case. "McKinney versus Clearwater Meadows Homeowners Association and Clearwater Development." The words echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Carla rose for the opening statement. Her voice was calm, but it carried strength. "This case is not about greed. It's not about one man trying to disrupt a community. It's about honoring a legal promise written a century ago, a promise made by a man who had seen too many families robbed of their land. That man, Ezekiel McKinney, ensured his descendants would always have a voice in what happened to their property. Today, we bring his voice into this courtroom. Gasps and murmurs rolled through the gallery. Leonard sat still, hands folded, his grandfather's words burning in his memory. The defense attorney, a tall man named Charles Whitman, stood for their side. His tone was smooth, practiced, dismissive. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard is a story, a sentimental tale about history and legacy. But this is a court of law, not nostalgia. The subdivision was built legally, with county approval, with state permits, with legitimate sales. The McKinney deed, while interesting, is a relic of the past. It does not and cannot override the clear property rights of these homeowners. To side with Mr. McKinney is to uproot families, destroy investments, and destabilize an entire community. The homeowners in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded along, others frowned. The trial pressed forward. Carla presented the deed, carefully preserved, Ezekiel's signature bold at the bottom. She walked the jury through its language, pointing to the reversion clause written in 1924. This wasn't accidental. Ezekiel McKinney anticipated exploitation. He gave his family the power to say no, and no consent was ever given, Charles countered with expert testimony. A real estate historian claimed such clauses were common but unenforceable after decades. Times change, he said confidently. Old promises cannot bind modern development. Leonard felt heat rise in his chest, but Carla squeezed his arm under the table, warning him to stay quiet. When Denise testified, her voice shook, but carried conviction. She recounted the stories passed down through their family. The courthouse fights, the long walks Ezekiel made, the nights their father spread receipts across the table to prove every cent had been paid. Charles objected, sneering, "Anecdotes don't change ownership, Your Honor." But Judge Worthington allowed it. The jury will decide what weight to give it. During cross-examination, Charles leaned toward Denise, his tone sharp. "So you're telling this jury that a 100-year-old piece of paper is more important than the lives of the families living there now?" Denise straightened, her eyes fierce. "I'm saying it's the only reason those families have homes at all, because my grandfather kept this land from being stolen before. If he hadn't, there'd be nothing here to fight over." The gallery stirred, a ripple of whispers. Then came Leonard's turn. Carla guided him gently through his testimony. He spoke of Ezekiel's foresight, of the land as more than property. It was identity, sacrifice, survival. His voice broke when he described his father's struggle to keep the taxes paid, how every harvest, every paycheck had gone first to protecting the deed. When Charles rose to cross-examine, his tone dripped with disdain. "Mr. McKinney, isn't it true you've lived rent-free on this land for decades?" Leonard's eyes narrowed. "Rent-free? My family paid in sweat, blood, and taxes for a century. You call that free?" Charles smirked. "You expect the jury to believe that evicting 156 families is justice?" Leonard leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. "Justice is telling the truth, even when it's inconvenient. I'm not evicting anyone. I'm exposing the ones who lied to all of us." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge glanced up, his expression unreadable. By the end of the day, the air felt electric. Reporters rushed out to file stories, residents argued on the courthouse steps, and Leonard sat exhausted, his body heavy, but his spirit unbroken. As they left the courtroom, Carla whispered, "You held your own. The jury saw your heart, Leonard. That matters more than you know." Leonard nodded, glancing back at the empty courtroom. He could almost see Ezekiel standing there, arms crossed, proud and unyielding. But Leonard knew tomorrow would bring more witnesses, more arguments, and possibly the one revelation that could tip the scales forever. The trial stretched on for nearly 2 weeks, each day heavier than the last. By the time closing arguments came, Leonard felt worn to the bone. He hadn't slept properly in days, his thoughts tangled with memories of Ezekiel, Denise's determined face, and the desperate eyes of homeowners who had stopped him in parking lots, begging for answers he didn't have. On the morning of the final session, the courthouse was more crowded than ever. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing as Leonard and Denise walked inside with Carla. The homeowners were there too, some grouped together in silent fear, others glaring openly at Leonard as if he had written the HOA's lies himself. Patricia and Alan sat in the back row, their faces tight but supportive. Judge Worthington called the jury back in. Before they deliberated, both sides gave their final words. Carla stood, her tone steady but charged. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about one man trying to steal. It is about honoring a legal safeguard written with foresight and pain. Ezekiel McKinney didn't write this deed for himself. He wrote it for the generations who would come after him, people who had already seen their land stolen once and refused to see it stolen again. If we dismiss his voice today, what we're saying is that justice has an expiration date. That truth doesn't matter once enough time has passed. I ask you not to let that happen. Charles rose next, smooth as ever. This is about stability. Families built lives here. Children grew up here. These people invested everything in homes they believed were theirs. To grant this claim is to unravel all of that, to throw 156 households into chaos because of a clause written 100 years ago. We cannot run a modern community on the fears of the past. We must live in the present. The jury filed out. The hours that followed were torture. Leonard sat stiffly in the wooden pews, Denise gripping his hand. Carla reviewed her notes in silence, though Leonard noticed her pen tapping against the folder, betraying her nerves. At one point, Patricia leaned forward from her seat behind Leonard. Her voice was soft. No matter what happens, you did the right thing. You told the truth. Leonard nodded without looking back. I hope that's enough. After 4 hours, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone filed back in, the air so thick with tension that Leonard thought he might choke on it. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and a steady gaze, stood and handed the verdict slip to the judge. Judge Worthington read silently, then cleared his throat. In the matter of McKinney versus Clearwater Meadows and Clearwater Development, we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Leonard McKinney. The room erupted. Gasps, cries, a few shouts of disbelief. Leonard sat frozen, the words ringing in his ears. For a moment, he couldn't move. Denise burst into tears beside him, clutching his arm. Carla exhaled sharply, her eyes bright with triumph. Judge Worthington continued, his tone firm. The court recognizes the validity of the reversion clause in the McKinney deed of 1924. Ownership of the disputed land reverts to the McKinney family. Further hearings will determine the specific remedies regarding existing homeowners. Bradley Kincaid slammed his hand on the defense table, his face flushed with anger. Charles leaned toward him, whispering furiously, but Leonard hardly noticed. He felt the world tilt, the years of struggle, the weight of history pressing down and lifting all at once. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions flying. Mr. McKinney, do you plan to evict the families? What happens now? How do you feel? Leonard raised his hand for silence. His voice carried steady over the crowd. This was never about taking homes away. It was about proving the truth, that my grandfather's promise still matters. The developers lied to all of us. I don't want anyone out on the street. What I want is respect, for my family, for the law, and for the history that was nearly erased. Some reporters pressed for more, but Leonard stepped back, letting Carla handle the rest. Denise wrapped her arm around him, whispering through her tears, "We won, Leonard. We really won." But as the cheers and cries mingled outside the courthouse, Leonard's expression stayed solemn. He knew victory wasn't the end. The fight over what would happen to those 156 families had only just begun. Some would see him as a hero, others as the man who threw their lives into chaos. That night, sitting alone on his porch, Leonard unfolded the deed once more. He traced Ezekiel's signature with his finger, the ink faded but still powerful. "We did it, Grandpa," he murmured. "They heard you." The stars glittered above, the same sky Ezekiel had looked at a century earlier. Leonard closed his eyes, letting the weight lift just enough for him to breathe. But as relief washed over him, Leonard also knew the lesson of this fight wasn't finished. The verdict was just one part of a story meant to remind everyone what happens when you guard the truth with everything you have. The days following the verdict were unlike anything Leonard had ever experienced. Strangers pulled into his driveway just to shake his hand. Others left letters, some congratulating him, some accusing him of tearing the community apart. The phone rang non-stop. Journalists, lawyers, even distant cousins who hadn't spoken to him in years. For Leonard, it was overwhelming, but also strangely quiet inside. He had carried the fight for so long that victory didn't feel like a roar. It felt like an exhale. Denise noticed it too. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the fields, she nudged him with her elbow. "You don't seem happy," she said. Leonard sipped his coffee, eyes on the horizon. "I am. Just not the way people expect. This isn't the kind of win you celebrate with fireworks. It's the kind you sit with, the kind that makes you think about the cost." The cost was visible everywhere. Some Clearwater Meadows families were furious. A group held a protest outside the county offices, holding signs that read, "Protect our homes," and "Stop McKinney's land grab." Others, like Patricia and Alan, invited Leonard to community meetings to explain what might happen next. For every hug, there was a glare. For every thank you, an accusation. But Leonard handled it with patience. At one meeting, a man demanded angrily, "What gives you the right to hold us hostage with your grandfather's signature?" Leonard took a deep breath before answering. "What gives me the right? The law. But what gives me the responsibility? My grandfather's blood, my father's sweat, and my mother's tears. They gave everything so this land wouldn't be stolen again. I don't take that lightly. I don't want to punish anyone here. I want justice for my family, and fairness for yours." The room fell silent, the man lowering his eyes. Slowly, the tone of the conversations shifted. People began realizing the real villains weren't Leonard or even the jury. It was the developers who had gambled on land they didn't own, hoping nobody would notice. Carla pressed that point in follow-up hearings. "These homeowners are victims too," she told the judge. The developers deceived them just as they tried to deceive the McKinney family. The case for damages was still ongoing, but already the state attorney general's office had announced an investigation into Clearwater Development's practices. Through it all, Leonard kept returning to the land, walking the fields, touching the soil, standing by the old oak tree where Ezekiel once tied his mule. It grounded him in a way the courthouse never could. Denise often joined him, carrying a notebook where she scribbled memories and family stories, determined to preserve them for the next generation. One night, Patricia visited again, her voice softer than before. "Mr. McKinney, I want you to know, some of us were afraid of you at first. We thought you were here to destroy what we built. But now, I see you were protecting what was always yours. I don't know what the future looks like for us, but I respect what you did." Leonard smiled faintly. "Respect is all I ever wanted. If people understand why this matters, then we can figure the rest out together." In the weeks that followed, Leonard began speaking at local schools and community groups. He told Ezekiel's story, showed copies of the deed, and urged young people to know their history. "The system will always test you," he told one group of high schoolers. "If you don't protect what's yours, someone else will claim it. Sometimes the only thing that keeps the truth alive is one stubborn signature." The moral of it all became clearer with each retelling. Justice doesn't always roar into your life with banners and applause. Sometimes it creeps in through persistence, through patience, through the steady refusal to let go of what matters. Leonard knew the fight wasn't really over. It would ripple through courts and communities for years. But the seed Ezekiel planted had borne fruit at last. On a quiet Sunday morning, Leonard walked alone to the edge of his property. He looked over the rows of new houses, children's bikes on porches, sprinklers watering manicured lawns. He didn't hate those families. In a strange way, they were part of the story now, too. They had been caught in the trap Ezekiel had set, not to harm them, but to make sure justice waited until someone strong enough picked it up. He placed a hand on the old oak's bark, rough against his skin, and whispered, "We held on, Grandpa. just like you told us. For Leonard, that was the lesson. That foresight, sacrifice, and grit could outlast generations. That even when history tries to bury you, the truth can claw its way back if you refuse to let it go. And as the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the land, Leonard felt peace, not because the fight was over, but because he had honored the promise. So when you think about your own life, your family, your story, remember this: history only survives if we defend it. Truth only matters if we refuse to let it be erased. And legacy. Legacy is the gift you protect, not just for yourself, but for those who come after. Subscribe to the channel if you believe stories like Leonard's should never be forgotten. Because sometimes the most powerful traps aren't the ones that destroy, but the ones that protect what truly matters.